a little ballerina.
Oh, thank you. You look so beautiful. I love that outfit. It looks nice and beautiful. I just want to hear about Clara from your perspective and what viewers can expect to see from her on screen this season.
Mm. Um, I look at Clara as like the conductor of her family, as if her family is an orchestra and she's the conductor. But just sort of because of the time, and because of who she is, she would never stand up on the podium and kind of do it blatantly. She would never kind of gestate wildly, to conduct the orchestra. She kind of has to do it with a look, with a touch, with a whisper, with a glance. It's just like really quiet support. And I think that's my favorite thing about her, is that she really wakes up every morning and is like, this is my purpose. Like, let me make sure that these people are okay. And for me, there's something sad about that, because I have such big dreams. I have nothing to nothing to do necessarily with my husband and my son. They're part of my story, but for her, making sure her family is okay is kind of the most important thing of her, about her day. And there's something really simple and beautiful about that. And so this year you see her kind of go from being, this season you see her go from being kind of a sounding board into an active person who you find out maybe there's something else going on deeper than that she is looking for her own thrill and her own thing and her own way to have a meaningful existence, and she is able to find that in supporting her through supporting her husband. But it's sort of interesting, the actions that she's willing to take this season.
Absolutely. You have such a beautiful interpretation of her. And that really brings us into my next question, which was the fact that the original Perry Mason series had a very predominantly male cast. And I look at the characters in the female characters in the new series, and it brings me so much joy because they have these passions that you had mentioned, and they're getting things done. How do you think that the new Perry Mason series changes the dynamic by featuring these female characters more so? And what do you hope that they can achieve as the story goes on?
Yeah, well, I think it's nice because it's getting a little closer to the truth. Whether history tells us or not, like, we know that women were so influential even in business, there's a documentary about how much Nancy Reagan was running the White House, while her husband was president. I mean, women, whether we have stood back or not with our gloves and our hats and smiled, we've always, like the old folks used to say, the man is the head of the household, but the woman is the neck, and the neck turns the head. And so I just think it's a little more truthful. There was always a woman there. There was always that, whether she was legitimately on the team or not, there was always a woman there. And I even think about, shucks, I'm not going to remember her name, which is terrible, but there's a famous picture of Martin Luther King and all his strategists by him. And there's a Dorothy Height. No, I'm gonna have to Google it. But they put her in the middle of the picture, because anytime she was on the end, the press would cut her out of the picture, because they loved this narrative that these were the men who were the brains of the civil rights movement. And it's just not the truth. There's always been a woman there. There's always been a person of color there. There's always been a gay person there, whether that has been the story told to history or not. So it's just nice to get closer to the truth.
Absolutely. And you guys do it so beautifully. It's a wonderful thing to see. And something else that's wonderful to see is the visuals in this show. There's been a lot of praise for just the attention to detail in their portrayal of Los Angeles during the era. Now, I want to know, how did the production design and the costumes and all of this stuff help you get into character? And what was it like to work on a show that was just so visually stunning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You just said it. It is visually stunning, and it is nice to be like, oh wow, that's me in the middle of that beautiful shot. Especially in Seven, there's some really beautiful stuff. You know, I come from theater where you do a lot of work yourself. You have to sort of paint the fourth wall, which is like the back of the theater, and you have to imagine what's back there. And you rehearse for so long before they put you in the costume and all that. So for this, it really is adding that magical element of just, you don't have to imagine. We're in a bungalow that is so beautifully designed to be period. You don't have to fake it. The chairs are small. You take up less space. You put on the costume, and you stand up a little straighter. You put on the shoes. They pinch your feet in that way. It sort of gives you the physicality. And the way you move through space, it really it informs that so well. It's kind of like a little magical ingredient. And so, yeah, that is a real gift as an actor.
I can imagine, and just it's such an experience to watch it as a viewer. So I feel like being in that world has to be so crazy. I can't even imagine.
We were in line for, I think it was for 6, and we were in line, and there were just like 100 beautiful Black extras, all in the period looks. It felt like a really safe way to time travel. Because as a Black person, you're like if somebody tomorrow was like, we found the time machine, we can do it, we can all go, I'd be like, I'm good. I'll come here. But it was kind of fun to time travel and know that I was safe. I could return anytime I wanted.
You should always feel that way, but I'm glad you're able to have that outlook. Now this show, what's so interesting about this show is it's set in 1932, but it is something that is loved today. Not a lot of the content gets lost. It's appreciated by audiences to this day, and that's not a very common thing with period pieces. So what do you think it is about Perry Mason that makes it relevant and compelling to modern day audiences?
Well, I mean, anytime you have these characters that are so dedicated to finding the truth, that's going to resonate. And to be honest, a lot of the same dynamics are either felt today, either the residue from those dynamics is felt today, or those dynamics are just plainly playing out today. And so I think it's nice to sort of, like you're saying, have the escapism of delving into such a world that feels so beautiful and cinematic, but then also not shying away from the issues and the stakes that we have today. So you kind of get the best of both worlds, is that you have a relatable, compelling storytelling, but you also get the escapism of just how beautiful the world is, how rich the colors are, how fun it is to see women in hats and and men in hats. And yeah, I just think you get the best of both worlds.
Makes me want to go out and buy a hat, like go to the Kentucky Derby or something. Now you mentioned before that with Clara and with the female characters in this show, we sort of go closer to the truth and we see the things that were really happening. What do you hope that viewers take away from your performance as you portray this, and just that message in general?
I think it really is. I just love taking a look at these Black characters who are both extraordinary and unextraordinary at the same time. I mean, Paul Drake is obviously very good at his job, but at the same time, they're almost just regular Black people, and a lot of times when you see Black stories and period pieces, it's like, these people worked at NASA, it's like, these are the smartest, they endured the most tragic circumstances you can imagine. It's so intense that we don't often get like our Mad Men, or, the story where obviously there's drama and stakes and it's compelling to watch, but it's not about the most extraordinary Negroes ever to exist, And so I think that what's extraordinary about them is their love, and the fact that they did lead quiet lives that had major impacts on the fact that we're still here and the way that the Black family has survived. And that, I think, is really sweet and compelling to watch. That's why I love the Drakes so much, because you really don't see them on TV.
Now, what exactly drew you to the role of Clara in this project in the first place?
Oh, I was gonna say, well, I wanted to work. Like, it was an audition that came through. But I feel really lucky because it was an audition that came through, and Perry Mason was like everything for my grandmother. My grandmother loved Perry Mason, Matlock, Murder, She Wrote. Any white person that was after the truth, my grandmother was in. And so just the music and all that, the original theme song, like automatically like puts me back into like the happy mood of my childhood. So that was really exciting. And just to become a part of that, just to have the opportunity to become part of that universe, because it's just such classic American entertainment. But I didn't know that Clara would, at the time, she was just kind of going to appear in like a couple of episodes. I didn't know that she would become such a big part of the world. And so I just feel really grateful that she's evolved in that way.
What is it like to see a character of yours evolve so much? Is it a feeling of pride? How does it feel?
It was super necessary, I'll say, because there was a long hiatus between season 1 and season 2. And I almost changed from top to bottom as a woman. Like, there was pandemic. I lost my mother. I became a mother. It was like all these, like, I felt like a totally new person. And then when they called and said, we're going to do season 2 now, I remember thinking, I don't even remember that. Like, I don't remember that woman. I don't have the same, I literally have a different body now. And so it was so nice when they were like, well, she's changed so much. She has a child. She's lived through the worst year of depression, of the Great Depression. She has lost her sort of standing in society as she once knew it, because her husband's lost her job and she's moved in with her brother. So I felt like her evolution was right on track with mine. And I had just moved through 2 really transformative years. So I think if Clara had been exactly the same, I would have had a tough time finding her again, actually. When that was that first scene, and it was very clear that Clara was like, you need to get a job. Like, and she was running it. And I pulled that cigarette from his hand. I was like, oh, this is Clara's a woman now. She was a girl 2 years ago. And that just really tracked for me personally, thankfully.
Oh my gosh, I love your perspective on that so much. I think it adds so much to it to know how like parallel and aligned that you felt with this character. That's so beautiful. I have to ask, were there any of your favorite moments that you had on set, or any of your favorite particular days on set, or just any fun moments you guys had while filming?
Yeah, I love working with Chris. We always have a lot of fun. But it was really fun to do. I think it's episode 4 where we're dancing, and we got to have a little dance lesson. And we both come from the theater. And so it was nice to have a rehearsal, and we're in our street clothes, and we got to play in the space and work with Dom Kelly, who was the choreographer. And I'm almost sure that's his name. I think that's his name. And just play around with that movement and what they would have done. And that was really fun. And also, of course, 107, which is airing on Monday, just finally getting to get out in the field, after hearing so much about his day and what he's up to, and sort of understanding how how much momentum, how you can get caught up in the momentum of wanting to find out, wanting to get to the bottom of something. Because I think Clara's position is like, let these white folks figure this shit out on their own. That's really been her thing. Don't get so wrapped up in it. And then Clara gets wrapped up in it and does something that she really didn't see herself doing when she woke up that morning.
So to start us off, Perry Mason is set in the 1930s, a time where America was facing very interesting social and political change, as we see in the show. How did you prepare for this role in terms of just understanding the historical context of the time period and everything that you would be experiencing on screen?
Well, the prep, you have to understand, I grew up in the 50s, so I'm kind of an older guy, and I grew up on 1930s and 1940s gangster movies, James Cagney, Edward G. Robinson, Humphrey Bogart. This is where I kind of realized that I was really into the storytelling thing that's going on. So, and I was telling somebody else that my grandfather, who is what Lydell McCutcheon, my character, is immediately modeled after. My grandfather was a man who was a son of immigrants from Poland. He came to this country with them, had a fighting claw for all the money that he made, and he was very afraid of anybody who wasn't white. So he threw the N-word around. He tried very hard to indoctrinate me into the lifestyle or feeling of being a racist. And so he threw the N-word around all the time. I had to find out what the world was about myself when I finally left home and joined the Navy and saw what the world was about. And I realized back then that my grandfather was a man full of fear that the unknown was going to take something away from him that he worked very hard for. So my prep for this character, Lydell McCutcheon, is my grandfather, who was a racist, who was very afraid. So that's the underlying thing that is underneath everything Lydell does for his family is fear. So he seems mean and he's a bad guy, but he's afraid of something. He's afraid, very afraid. He loves his family dearly, but he's full of fear. So in essence, that's really what it was. Plus, I just loved all these things that Cagney and Bogart did back in the 30s and 40s. I wanted to bring more of a realistic turn to it, because if you look at that acting now, it's a little bit blown out, a little bit, two-dimensional. So I was thrilled to be able to wear the clothes, the hat, the tie, it was a blast.
That's a brilliant story. Do you think having this, these own influences in your life, do you think that helped you to understand this character better?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's in episode 7, which is probably my favorite episode, that's where you can really see my grandfather's underside coming out. And my grandfather was a mean SOB. No doubt about that. He was very mean. He was mean to me and my siblings, but he loved us. That's the same thing that George Carlin talks about, organized religion, teaching you that God is vengeful and you have to follow the 10 Commandments and you're going to go to hell and burn, but he loves you. So that's kind of like what Lydell McCutcheon's all about.
You mentioned before, which I really love, is from these action films, 30s and 40s. That's what really put you on to this love of storytelling. What exactly is it about this particular style of storytelling that you're drawn to?
Well, I like realistic type stories that go into history, but part of the thing was when I'd be watching television with my deaf father. My parents were deaf, and there were no closed captioning at the time. So I would have to sit next to the television with my father sitting there watching the TV, and I'd be signing everything to my father about what James Cagney was saying, top of the world, ma, and all that stuff, in these old movies. So in the process of interpreting in sign language to my father and sometimes my mother, what was going on that screen, I could see the recognition of, my dad was getting the story instead of watching. I asked him one time, when he watched Bonanza, do you know what the story's about? My dad would say, no, I'm just making it up in my own head. I don't know what they're saying to each other. I thought to myself, I can't let that stand. I can't abide that. Let me show you what they're saying. And he'd be like, wow, oh, so that's, this is a story. So I realized the storytelling and the recognition in people's eyes of, this is thrilling, this is great, this is making me cry, this is making me laugh. When I got that, I thought to myself, this is a good business right here. This is a good racket to be able to tell a story. So that's really when it happened. I was just a little boy. And then as I got older, I realized somebody told me, you can actually learn. This is a craft. A craft? Yeah, you can learn how to act. What? So I started doing it. And lo and behold, it takes many, many years. What I didn't know is it takes many, 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 many years. So respect, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And just sitting here with you now, you're a brilliant storyteller. And that's such a beautiful story of how you fell into it. Do you have a favorite of any of those movies?
The movies that I saw?
Yeah.
Anything with Cagney. I just watched The Searchers last night with John Wayne, and I'm realizing how racist that movie is. But as a boy, it made me cry. It's like, oh my God, they should remake this movie. I watched White Heat with James Cagney last week. What a crappy movie. It's horrible. But I watched it and I realized as a boy, it moved me. So I want to go back and remake all those movies with today's sensibilities, you know what I mean? So that's why doing Perry Mason, the 30s with today's sensibilities, it's great. And now they're starting to make Westerns with today's sensibilities, showing how this land was raped and stripped away from the Native Americans. So I think it's cool to go back and make these old movies with today's sensibilities. So that's partly why I really love doing Perry Mason. So let's have more of that.
Is that something you can see yourself doing in the future of your career, recreating some of these older movies?
Great. Yeah, I'll cut my hair tomorrow for that. Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like that's a very cool take on it. Now, something that I think is brilliant about Perry Mason and that a lot of people feel is the show's attention to detail for their portrayal of Los Angeles during that era and the visuals and all of that stuff. Now, how did this production design and the costumes help you really get into the character of Lydell? And what was it like to work on such a visually stunning show?
Heaven. All I can say is heaven. The costumes, the oil fields, they built that set just for the oil fields.
Oh,
and
wow.
when they realized how magnificent up in the Santa Clarita Hills, when they realized how magnificent it was, they said, we have to shoot more scenes out here. So they added more scenes, wrote more scenes for that set. The cars, the shanty town where the immigrants live, that's supposed to be Chavez Ravine originally, but it's built up in the hills. So they were building things where you can't help but feel it. You walk on that set with this suit, and a 1933 limousine right there that's actually running with that motor. You get halfway there to being there. So they really put everything they had on that screen. You can see it too. It's just dripping with money just coming out of that screen. With the ties, the pins, everything, the cufflinks. It's amazing. Just an amazing experience. I look back at it, it's just, that was really heavenly. And like I've said this before, everybody on that set was just happy as punch to be there. In front of the camera, behind the camera, being supportive of each other. If we had a good take on a scene, people behind the camera, you could see they were like we did this together. We're with you. So it was very, very supportive. I loved every minute of it.
I always love to hear that. And it's such an experience to watch with all these little details. I can't imagine what it's like to be in that world and be really a part of it. Now, something that we were just mentioning was how, you have all these older movies and they're very interesting concepts, but they don't necessarily translate into modern day. But Perry Mason really does. Now, this show is set in 1932, but it's still very loved in modern day. So many audiences love it so much. Now, what do you think it is about Perry Mason that makes it relevant and compelling to modern audiences as opposed to some of the movies that you mentioned before?
Well, the acting, for one thing. Like when you're a kid, you're watching these movies and you're just impressed by anything. But I will say, every actor that I came in contact with in this Perry Mason shoot was professional, on it, knew what they were doing, and was thrilled to be there. So and now when I watch it, and I watched Perry Mason as a boy, the characters are so much more fleshed out. You know, Paul Drake, Della, who is absolutely lovely. The acting just takes it to another level. And so when you've got acting at that level, you have to rise above what you're normally used to doing and just meet them right there. So that's what's happening on every single scene I see from Perry Mason. So it's the acting, the costumes, and just the feeling, the happy feeling of we're doing something special here. And what more could you ask for on a set? Just we're doing something special here, and we're doing it together. So what a great time.
Absolutely. And now, as an actor, and obviously as one who has such a unique and wonderful perspective on storytelling, what draws you to roles like Lydell and like the one you play on Perry Mason? And what do you hope that viewers take away from your performances?
Oh, I don't know. I hope they see that, like I say, I had to audition for Perry Mason because all they ever saw me do was Sound of Metal. And Sound of Metal, there's this, a guy who runs a sobriety program, very nice, very low key. And so I don't think they were quite sure if I could handle a guy as nasty as Lydell. So of course I had to audition, had to get called back. So I don't know if Hollywood sees you quite as an all-around actor. They just see you as this one thing, and then that's who you are. But this really helped show another side of me. And there are other sides. I've done comedy. I grew up at Second City in Chicago doing improvisational comedy. So I've got a lot of comic things in my little chest of my tool of the trade. But I don't know. I hope they just see me as more of just an actor who's capable of doing many things. But this is good for me just to stretch out. I like episode 7 because not only is Lydell a nasty guy, I think you can see the softer part of his self coming out, that he really is afraid of something and he's full of fear, and that's why he does the things he has to do, because he loves his family. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. It's a strange thing out here in Hollywood, and the offers are coming through, but you have to be careful with how you're going with your career.
Now, as you just mentioned, Lydell is a bit of a nasty, not the nicest character. Did you face any challenges in terms of just bringing him to life, and what was that whole process like?
No, the challenge is that there's not enough of him for me. Of course, there's never enough of Paul Raci. But the challenge is that I didn't get an opportunity to show his softer side until later on. I think that's a good thing though, because of this episode. You've got to see. And they're taking you in a certain direction. And of course, if you're a Perry Mason fan, you'll see why this all happened. In episode 7 and 8, I think you finally see why Lydell is the way he is. But it takes a little while. So episodics are fantastic. That I have to watch every episode twice because there's so much going on in the writing that it's very complicated. And I think people, for the most part, like a show like that. It's full of more than one shade. So you have to really put your thinking cap on. And you can look online and see how people are thinking. They think a whole bunch of things about who killed Brooks. It's hilarious. It's fantastic that it causes that much buzz. But yeah, you've got to be careful. The character like Lydell, you don't want to be a caricature. He's got to be real. And so episode 7, I think you're finally going to see that.
I'm excited for everyone to see it. I love going online and seeing what people are saying about the shows I watch. It's so fun. I have to ask, did you have any favorite moments from filming this show and just anything that you loved from your time on set?
Well, the whole thing was such a great experience. I do love the Santa Anita Raceway scene with Perry, but I also love episode 7, skeet shooting with my grandson, turning around with a shotgun in my hand saying, "What are you doing here, Mason?" That's my favorite Perry Mason moment. Too much fun.